Hey everyone, it's Jessie from b.a.r.e Flower Farm. Now, I know it can be intimidating to cold call or cold walk into a florist shop to try to sell your stems. So that's why preparation is key to building some level of confidence. And that's what I wanted to focus today's video on. So if you've been following me on Instagram, I have been harvesting tulips out the wazoo basically for the last week. I've got basically 3 of these bouquets here. These are actually all accounted for in terms of people wanting to buy them. People are coming to pick them up, which is really, really exciting. But there are 2 things about this that made me really want to expedite thinking about selling to a florist. The first is that selling to a florist is a lot easier. I don't have to coordinate pickup. I don't need to market my stems. And then the second thing is that I honestly did not do a good job this year of cultivating the right kind of following. So in other words, I did sell at my farmer's market, which was great, but on the off weeks where I could not sell at the farmer's markets, I used Marketplace. And so I always say that, there are many different types of customers out there, of which we choose to shop by price, right? So the people on Facebook Marketplace are not necessarily the people who are walking into a florist shop to pay, we'll call it like $45 for a bouquet like that. They're looking for a bit of a deal. So, my Facebook Marketplace is not a great outlet to sell something like winter forest tulips, which have a higher input. So for example, that bouquet that I just showed you, that has 9 stems. Ideally, I'm selling each stem for at least $2 to $2.50 direct to consumer retail, which would put that at minimum like a $20 range. I'm selling them for $15 because they're not getting bites on Facebook and I just want to get them out. So I thought that this would be the perfect opportunity to actually start cold walking into florists' shops and seeing if they would be interested in buying these winter forest tulips. So this is going to be a 3-part series. Today, I'm actually going to talk about 3 things. Who to cold walk or call, the homework you need to do, and the processes that you need to think of. My next video, I'm actually going to walk through how I make my availability sheet in PowerPoint. I know not everyone uses PowerPoint, but for those of you who have the program, I'm kind of good at PowerPoint, I guess, because I've been doing it for 10 years at my job. So I was able to whip one up in 20 minutes. I think it looks pretty decent. So I'm going to walk you through some of the steps. I'm going to provide a high-level template, and I'm also going to show you some few shortcuts that will make your life a lot easier on PowerPoint. And then part 3, I started recording this, but it's not done yet. I am actually doing snippets of just my experience cold walking into a florist shop, talking about the experience. I'm not obviously showing the interactions happening, but I'm summarizing some stuff that we talk about so you get an idea of just how conversations go, how I talk about my stems, that kind of stuff. So without further ado, let's get started on part 1. First, let me just preface by saying that not everyone should be selling to a florist, especially if you're a beginner cut flower farmer. So I know that my channel is really geared towards that year 1 to year 3 cut flower farmer. For me personally, I did not want to even touch a florist this year in year 1 because florists really want 3 things. They want quality, they want consistency, and they want quantity. So I think that quality is something that we as all farmers can achieve pretty quickly, especially since we're competing against imported stems that typically are low quality to begin with, but it's the consistency and the quantity that become very difficult. So consistency meaning, can you provide the product on a consistent basis? Can you provide that? Can you provide that at a quantity and quality on a consistent basis? And then quantity is just, realistically, how many can you sell, right? Because you might have, let's just say, 100 zinnias coming in at once, but if you only ever have it once, it's kind of hard to find a florist who wants, wants flowers on the fly versus having a standing order. Now, that being said, there are plenty of florists out there who actually do like event work. They do work that allows them to basically buy on the fly, but a lot of florists want some level of consistency and anticipation of what you are going to have. So with that being said, if you are a newer grower, you're not fully confident in growing, you're not fully confident in understanding how many stems you're going to get out of something, Obviously, this video is still relevant for the future, but I would not go out banging on doors right now until you've got that part nailed down. All right, so now that we've talked about just, who as a flower farmer should be considering florists. So I would say that, if you're someone who is consistently producing stems where you can reliably say like, hey, I'm looking at my field, I'm looking at whatever it is, by Friday, 5 days from now, I anticipate I'm going to have X amount of sunflowers. I anticipate I'm going to have X amount of feverfew, right? Like those are things that you need to be able to project and understand for you to have a longer term relationship with a florist. So that being said, not all florists are created equal, just like not all customers are created equal. One of the things to understand about florists is that in the last few decades, something called wire services started popping up. And so you might know this as 1-800-Flowers, right? So these are websites that a typical consumer can log onto. These websites work with multiple local florists and they say like, hey, like I want a sunshine birthday bouquet. That sunshine birthday bouquet has like 3 sunflowers, 5 daisies, so forth. So that florist who receives that order from the town in which the person is ordering from needs to replicate that order in the photo. Now, what that means is that they are committing to buying a certain type of flower to be able to replicate the photo. Number 2, these wire service type of offerings are not particularly high margin, so they're less likely to want to buy local and more likely to want to buy from a wholesaler to keep their stem costs low. And number 3, they obviously cannot take unpredictability or lack of consistency from a flower farmer who cannot provide a level of volume or consistent stems on like, let's say a weekly or bi-weekly basis, right? So all that to say is that these types of florists are not necessarily good targets for people like us to walk into, right? So at the end of the day, you want to make sure that when you walk into a florist, you're looking at the right type of florist who would be more likely to be interested in buying local. Now, that being said, there are plenty of florists who take on these wire services, but also have a local base who come in to buy a bouquet on the fly. They might want to support local. Like every florist's situation is going to be different, right? But what I'm saying is that if you have a limited amount of stems and you're trying to figure out where to go, you should do your homework on this. And the easiest way to do this is either through Google or through social media like Instagram. Now, typically the types of florists that I target first are florists that are doing event work like wedding work, design work. These are florists where when you go to their website, you're not seeing that photo from a wire service like a 1-800-Flowers, right? You're seeing that they're like, you're seeing fresh products like dahlias, you're seeing zinnias in their photos, right? You're seeing cosmos, right? So you as a flower farmer should have a good idea of what is perishable and cannot be, or not perishable, but what cannot be easily shipped and transported versus those flowers that you can get at a wholesaler. And using that knowledge and triaging what you know, that's where you can make a decision, say, okay, this florist is probably actually already sourcing a bit from a local flower farmer. Let me go talk to her, right? And when you look at studies, even though florists typically work with, I think, a handful of local growers, typically they can't get enough supply. So there is still always a lot of room for people like us to be able to pitch product and make sure that we are addressing any gaps that they currently have with their current local suppliers. Now, what I do is whenever I find a florist or a designer who I think I could work with locally, I follow them on social media. I go to their website to check out a little bit about them. Typically, if they have an about page, you can get a lot from that, right? So all of this is, doing a little bit of investigation to understand how do you best pitch yourself when you go talk to them. So now that we've talked about what kinds of florists we should be going after, let's talk about doing our homework. So let's say that you found 2 or 3 florists that you want to hit up. I would always recommend going in person if possible. The exception is if obviously they do by appointment only. So for example, my top florist that I had picked only did it by appointment. So when I arrived, the shop was closed, obviously. And I was able to Facebook message or I was able to Instagram direct message that person, and they were really interested in talking after the holidays, right? So it's just one of those things where I think that it can work out, right? Assuming you find the right type of florist. But for most other florists, I prefer to actually go in with a bucket like this, usually with the same types of stems, like in bunches of 10s, and just saying like, hey, I'd love to leave a sample with you. Typically florists know that local is better quality, but I am selling specialty forest tulips. So I'll talk about this in part 3, but I left a bunch of parrot stems with a local florist, and it sounded like that they didn't work with a lot of parrots because parrots are inherently more expensive to buy from a wholesaler, right? So I just wanted them to see, how the parrots open up. The parrots are very dramatic. I wanted to see if potentially if they were to sell it to customers, maybe they would get positive feedback, right? So there's a bit of educating that you need to do, which I think is just better and more easily done in person. All right, but before you walk into that door, what are some things that you need to do? First, I think that you need to figure out your elevator pitch, right? An elevator pitch is literally 20 to 30 seconds of why should they buy from you. So an example of my elevator pitch, this is the exact pitch that I used when I walked into that florist that I just talked about. It was like, hi, my name is Jessie. I am actually a local flower grower down in Ashannock Station, which is about 5 miles away. And I focus growing flowers during the winter season, as well as the shoulder, spring, and fall seasons. I wanted to see if you would be interested in purchasing locally grown, sustainably grown stems. That's it, right? So in that elevator pitch, he knows, one, I'm local, where I am in proximity to him. This is a florist that is literally, I think, less than 5 miles away. Number 2, he understands what my focus is, right? And I think focus is important. So for me, focus is more around seasonality and less about flowers, but you could be a dahlia specialist. You could focus on just like sunflowers, right? So making it clear in terms of what you specialize, I think is always a lot easier than just going in and saying like, I grow everything, right? Which you might do, but you might want to narrow down on what you say you grow. And some of that can actually be done through observation, either before you cold walk in on their website or, walking through that shop and seeing like what they sell a lot of, right? So just hone in on some of the things that they might be interested in. And in my case, I know that in New Jersey, there's not a lot of people providing locally grown stems at this time to florists. So winter shoulder seasons for me. So what is your elevator pitch, right? Make sure you have that nailed down. Make sure that you're comfortable saying it, and make sure it is not a novel. They do not want to sit there listening to a novel. I got really lucky when I walked in that there was no one else there, but a lot of times florists are busy, right? Like they're helping customers. So you do not want to take up too much of their time. The second thing that I think is critical for you to do before you walk in is know your numbers. Now, when I say know your numbers, I'm not just saying knowing what you want to price your stems at. That is a given. You should know what the going rate is wholesale for the stuff that you're bringing in or that you want to sell. So for example, before I went that day, I checked Boston Ornamental Terminal, which is a USDA site that refreshes every single day. It literally shows you the prices of wholesale stems coming in from all around the world in Boston. I have a video that I'll link in the description below that I talk about in terms of deciphering a wholesale sheet, and that is the sheet that I use is Boston Ornamental Terminal. But the reason why you want to be able to understand what the prices are is because you want to have an educated conversation. So I looked that day at the wholesale sheet, and it said basically 10 stems of parrots, long stems coming from the Netherlands were for $14. And we actually used this in our conversation because I was trying to probe and get a little bit more information out of him. Like, do you guys normally buy local? What do you guys normally look for pricing and all that stuff? Because it became very evident that he wanted to work with local, but could not necessarily always afford the premium that local had. And, totally get that, right? Like, it really depends on the type of customers that walk into his door. So I was able to say, yeah, like, right now the going rate wholesale for these parrots are $14 for 10. And you can see him saying like, yeah, this is why like I stay away from parrots because it's a little bit more expensive. So that alone, being able to converse with him on that level one shows him that I know what I'm talking about. I don't think that florists are there to take advantage of you, but if there was a florist who's looking to take advantage of you, they would not be able to at that point because they know your numbers. And then number three, I was able to get a little bit more information out of him in that sense, right? Because sometimes florists may not be up to date on certain things that you're bringing in. So you can give them an idea like, hey, I typically price at least 20% above the wholesale sheet. You can have a conversation like that too. So I also talked about knowing your numbers in terms of what you want to charge. If you are going to go in and try to pitch a specific type of variety, specific type of flower, know how you're going to sell it. Typically, flower growers sell bunches of 10s. If you have a lot of, buds on one like Lysianthus, maybe you'll sell in bunches of 5. You can get, again, a lot of this information on that Boston Ornamental Terminal wholesale sheet. You can also go online to other flower farmers and see what they do. You can look at a local wholesaler and see how they're selling it, right? Typically, local wholesalers are better in the sense of just giving you an idea of more regional pricing. But I find that the Boston Ornamental Terminal for me is adequate because I am also on the East Coast here. But yeah, so what I'm really trying to say is do not walk in with a bucket of flowers and ask, yeah, like, how much do you want to pay for this, right? No, like, you make sure you understand what your minimum threshold is by looking at your costs, which include your seed starting, all of the time and effort you need to put in, any materials you need to put in there in the form of soil, fertilizer, lights, right? So all of that needs to be factored into what your baseline level is in terms of what you're comfortable of parting with to the florist, right? So like naturally selling to a florist at wholesale volume is going to fetch less per stem than going to a normal customer. But on the other hand, you get to save time, right? So that is really the positive trade-off in terms of going to a florist. So now that we've talked about just who you should be targeting as a florist, as well as the preparation you need to do in advance, there's additional preparation that you need to do that we need to talk about, which is how are you going to sell and what does that selling infrastructure look like? Now, when I say infrastructure, it's less physical infrastructure and more the mental infrastructure that you need to start thinking about. So one example is a florist will undoubtedly ask you for your availability list or availability sheet. And this is just a sheet that tells them of what is available, what you're going to have available at a specific given time, what the cost is going to be, and the particular varieties that you're going to have. This can be as simple as literally a list, kind of like that Boston Ornamental Terminal Group wholesale sheet, just letters, no photos. It could be a gallery-like view. There's something called Airtable out there where you can kind of manage an availability sheet, having photos and stuff to make it more easily identifiable for a florist. Or you can have it like me, where I created a PDF through PowerPoint. That's part 2 on how I did it, but I created a PDF to show, hey, here's my winter tulip forcing program. Here's all the varieties that I expect to have. I make it very clear that my winter forcing program is relatively small. We're trying to hit something like Valentine's Day. So most of the varieties and stems that I have will come around a couple of weeks leading up to Valentine's Day. But I give them a clear idea of this is how much I'm going to sell in terms of per bunches of 10. This is roughly when I would expect to have them. And then in an email to them, I say every single Friday, starting mid-January, I'm going to actually put you on my email list and tell you exactly how many I'm going to have the following week. So that brings me to the second part, which is what is your process and how will you actually sell and collect money? So again, like there's multiple ways to do this. I've actually heard of flower farmers who have gotten so close with the florist that they do everything via text and then they send an invoice through something like QuickBooks. I've seen florists who have an online shop and that online shop has all their inventory that gets updated on a weekly basis, I'm going to say that this is a pain as someone who's run an online shop. You know, if you have a few varieties and SKUs, it's fine. But if you have a ton, like it's a headache to go in to update every single week. But honestly, like if you're providing an availability sheet, you're kind of going through the process anyway, right? So this is just something to consider if you're going to sell wholesale, is that you are going to have to be a little bit more on top and organized in terms of not only forecasting, but communicating to the end customer what you're going to have, or else they can't buy it, right? So some people have like an online shop through Squarespace, through a Shopify. And then some people kind of have like a mixture of both, right? So what I'm planning on doing is basically doing most of it through email, showing the availability through email. And I don't think I'm going to collect payment online through a website, or I'm not going to have like, here's my Lorenzo tulip, here's my Verona Sunrise tulip, you want to buy 10 of here. Like, I'm not going to have it like a normal checkout experience, because I'm currently using Squarespace right now. I'm still on the fence if I want to keep it. The problem with Squarespace and their lower plans is that you can't send invoices, which was really shocking to me. I was trying to sell tulip bulbs and I had to create custom products for each person who I sold them to. This is really surprising to me because I've been using Shopify for nearly 10 years and the base plan allows you to send invoices. So once I get my accounting software set up, believe it or not, I've been keeping track of everything in an Excel document, but I'm gonna migrate over to something like QuickBooks, then I can actually send out invoices. And I like the ability for, I think it's actually easier for most florists to be able to say like, hey, like you sent me an availability sheet, I want X, Y, Z in this quantity, and then I draft up an invoice for them, right? It's obviously less time consuming if I put everything on a website, but then I have to actually go into the website manually every single week and update inventory and keep track of that. And knowing my strengths and weaknesses, that is definitely a weakness for me to consistently do that, right? So that's why I'm taking this approach. But then the other thing you need to think about is like payment terms. Like, what are your payment terms going to be? So in the world of just wholesale retail, there's something called net terms. So net 48 hours means you have to pay within 48 hours of receiving the invoice. Net 30 means that 30 days after you receive the invoice, you have to pay it. You could have payment upon receipt. You can have net 60 days, right? It's completely up to you. I mean, there are some tulip bulb wholesalers out there who have net Easter terms, basically, which is basically you pay at Easter, even though you got the bulbs back in October, right? So you've got this wide gamut. For me, I'm thinking about just doing payment upon receipt, at least for the time being, since I'm doing such low volume. When I get above a certain volume of stems, then I would consider maybe like net 2-week type of payments, right? But it is ultimately up to you to decide and make it very clear to your florist in terms of what your payment terms are, right? So just to recap this piece of here, the florist needs to have a way of knowing your real-time availability. So whether or not that is updating availability list every week and sending it via email or doing it online or texting it, those are all alternatives. How will you facilitate the ordering and payment process itself? Is it going to be an online shop? Is it still going to be a text message where you invoice them? Or you could even use a platform such as Rooted Farmers, which connects local growers with florists. Now, there is an additional fee if you are a florist to put your product on there, but they take care of that exchange. They also take care of vetting the grower or the grower for you to make sure that they have a resale tax certificate if they're in a state that needs that, all that kind of stuff. So you obviously pay a certain percentage for that convenience that they provide. And the third piece is the payment terms, right? Like, what are the payment terms that you want? So hopefully this gives you a good idea of the things that I am personally thinking about right now. For me, this time of year, I'm very lucky in the sense that I get to take 2 weeks off from my full-time job. The main reason is because my company doesn't allow us to roll over PTO days. And it's honestly a blessing in disguise because you're forced to take those days. And, we have not done a lot of traveling. Eric's parents and family are all in California, so we made a trip out there once, but that was kind of it. We moved, I took a few days off, but our plans are not really to go on vacation, especially with the farms. I mean, you probably see some maps back here. We did a lot of traveling back in the day, a few years ago. We lived in Europe for a year, right? So we've got traveling out of our systems, and it's hard for me to use my days. So I get these 2 weeks off. I've been doing this since basically COVID started, and what I've loved about just not going anywhere and having time at home is I get to think about things like this. So a lot of you are not necessarily winter forcing tulips. You still have time to think about this, especially as we go into January, which is usually the quietest time of year for us. This is stuff, if you're thinking about selling to florists, that you should really get your act together on, right? Especially that infrastructure piece, knowing that you might need a website, setting up QuickBooks, right? All that stuff takes time to learn, to set up. You don't want to be doing that as your seed starting for the spring. You certainly don't want to be doing that at the height of harvest when you really don't have time to do any of this, right? So start thinking about this and stay tuned for part 2, where I'm going to show you how I create the availability list as well as provide a template. So Merry Christmas to all of you guys who celebrate it. Happy Hanukkah, which is already ongoing. And I hope everyone stays safe and warm, and I will see you guys after the holidays.